everyone. This is Mr. Honeynut, and today we're going to be talking about family roles. Now, you guys have already gone through the process of doing the notes, discussing different types of families. So now we're going to move more into the roles of which people play. So you have a set of notes today. So go ahead and get those out, and we will continue along. So roles. What are roles? So in a family, most people and ideally everyone should have a role, and a role is one's job within the family. So, for example, what is your quote unquote job? Now, automatically people go to think about like chores and things of that nature, but in many cases, it's more than just chores. A lot of times, roles can be designated or implied. A designated role means it's explicitly stated what you are to do. So, for example, when your parents say your job is to take out the trash every Tuesday, then that is a designated role. Or your job is to walk the dog every single day, then that is a designated role. It's what you're assigned to do. And even in some cases, your parents may have designated roles. So, for example, it may be, your mom may be going back to school or something. So, your dad's designated role is to watch over the household while your mom's at school and cook dinner every Tuesday and Thursday while your mom's at school, and that's been a designated role. Okay, that's what they've agreed on. That's what we plan on doing. That's how we're gonna do this stuff. Or a role can be implied. In other words, it's not necessarily designated, but based off like culture, based off how things typically go in society, it's kind of implied that this should be a role that we would take. So, for example, it's kind of implied and kind of accepted that your parents' role is to take care of you. Okay. So their job is to make sure that you get to school on time, that you do these sorts of things, and fall into that role. It may be implied that your role within the family is to go to school, okay, and work hard in school. So it's one of those things where it's kind of implied. It's not necessarily stated, but it's to make sure that your job is within the family is doing. It's kind of implied most often that you are to listen to your caregivers. So those are kind of the roles that exist within the family. So sometimes they're explicitly stated, sometimes not so much. So it's oftentimes what kind of roles do you have in your house? So what kind of jobs do you do? For some of you, this differs from house to house. So for some of you, you may have roles such as babysitting. Some of you may take the liberty of cooking meals and doing a lot of work in there. And some of you may not have as strong of a role in the house, but you do things that continuously fulfill a role. So, for example, your role may be to handle your schoolwork, so that way y'all can continue to do other things, and you may have little chores and things like that. So it all depends. But continuing along. The purpose. So basically, the purpose is that we want to maintain functionality of the family unit. As you saw a lot of times, and we'll see this again, the functionality of the family unit is very important. And in order to keep the house running smoothly, and when everybody does their share, everybody does their part, we maintain that functionality. Another part and the purpose of roles is to ensure the continuance of the family life cycle. So if you see here, we have the family life cycle, which is where once again, you have independence. This is where a person is out on their own, and then they go through coupling or marriage. So, as I mentioned yesterday, people who live alone are considered families. So, as a person being independent, they have their own roles of taking care of themselves. So, you want to have that. Then you go into coupling or marriage, where people end up together and they may have different roles within the marriage. And then you have parenting babies through adolescent. And like I said, this is just going through the idea of raising kids. But once again, you parent a child through adolescence. So you now have a couple that has a kid, or by by circumstance, it may end up being a single parent family, and you want to parent that child through adolescence. So then your role changes to, instead of caring for each other and caring for yourself, one would, as an adult, care for a child, and then that child would also develop roles within the family unit. Then you want to go into launching adult children. In other words, by them learning and having their own roles within the family unit, and then they launch into adulthood, they're going to be once again developing that independence as adults. But then also parents will go into quote unquote retirement or senior years where their role is going to change because they're now older and they don't have children anymore. And then also a child's role may change where they may end up becoming caregivers for their parents. So it's one of those things where throughout this whole entire unit, roles change and roles become more accentuated, and then they end up changing and they don't become as important. But overall, the jobs still exist within the family. All right. Functionality of family unit. This is just a reminder. Remember, a functional family must provide emotional support, economic support, recreation, kinship, housekeeping, and obviously many of you can see where roles would fall into that. So, what is important about roles is that they must, for the most part, check off these boxes in terms of everyone's individual role. So, first off, the role must be age appropriate. You're not going to ask a 2-year-old to cut the lawn, okay? That's very, very, that's not necessarily an age appropriate thing versus, for example, maybe asking a 13-year-old to cut the lawn may be more appropriate there. Another thing is it should give one in said role a sense of responsibility towards the family unit. So, in other words, the child must understand that, if their role is to take out the trash, there is a reason behind it and it gives them a sense of responsibility and that they are doing their part. Okay. While it may not always be fun, it's important to recognize that they're building skills for, their own life as they get older. And then finally, they want to be reasonable in ability and expectation. So, for example, a prime example may be like the role of a parent is to provide for the kids, make sure that they have, food to eat, a place to stay. And, that's very, once again, I would say being a parent, that would be a reasonable role and obviously a good expectation to have. For example, but for example, when you get into ideas like, for example, child stars like Jeanette McCurdy, she played Sam on iCarly. One of her biggest things is her family did not have a lot of money, and she was thrust into a role at a very young age of being the provider for her family at like such a young age. And you talk about it right now. She talks about how that was such a stressor for her in terms of being a child actor because once again, that may not have necessarily been a reasonable role and a reasonable expectation for her, but that was a role and expectation thrust onto her, and now she has reaped a lot of the unforgiving psychological benefits, quote unquote benefits, from it. So she's gone through a lot of mental health issues from that. So it's one of those things like you want to make sure that these roles that people are given are, once again, reasonable inability and expectation. So, are these appropriate roles? What I want you to do is you want to go through these roles right here. And I'm going to be checking these and making sure that you guys did this. But I want you to just do a simple yes or no and just sort of explain why. So, the first one, are these appropriate roles? So, for example, a mother must provide for her children. Is that an appropriate role and why? And so that's all you need to do. 5-year-old must cook for the family. All right, is that appropriate role? Why? So you just basically tell you yes or no and why. And that is going to be the tie-in and the finishing up of the notes for today. Now, if you are on B Day right now, it's listed that you are going to go through the process of doing, this is all you got to do for today. We will be watching Fuller House tomorrow and then going into taking some quick notes and things of that nature. So just know that the calendar will be switching up and changing a little bit. But that is all we have for today. Take care, submit it, and I will see you guys later.